All right, we shall continue our story. Just a small note before we start. Mary's uncle name is Archibald Craven, not Ark. Google pronounced it incorrectly. So, and the manor which she will live in the story from now on is called Misselthwaite. Misselthwaite. Misselthwaite Manor. All right. Let's start. Chapter 3. Across the Moor. She slept a long time, and when she awakened, Mrs. Medlock had bought a lunch basket at one of the stations. She slept a long time, and when she awakened, Mrs. Medlock had bought a lunch basket at one of the stations, and they had some chicken and cold beef and bread and butter and some hot tea. The rain seemed to be streaming down more heavily than ever, and everybody in the station wore wet and glistening waterproofs. Glistening waterproofs. Not sure what glistening mean, but we know what waterproof mean. It's against, doesn't affect by water. Glistening.
Glistening.
It means shining. Yeah, it's shining because the water, because it's wet. Yeah. The rain seemed to be streaming down more heavily than ever, and everybody in the station wore wet and glistening waterproofs. The guard lighted the lamps in the carriage, and Mrs. Medlock cheered up very much over her tea and chicken and beef. She ate a great deal, and afterward fell asleep herself. And Mary sat and stared at her, and watched her fine bonnet slip on one side until she herself fell asleep. We said yesterday that bonnet is the hat. It's a French name for a hat, but it's a hat. Bonnet. And Mary sat and stared at her and watched her fine bonnet slip on one side until she herself fell asleep. Once more in the corner of the carriage, lulled by the splashing of the rain against the windows. Lull, that's an interesting word. Let's see. What does it mean?
Lull.
Lull. It means calm. Lulled. Lull. Yeah. It's lull. Like the laugh out loud. Lull. But it's lull. Lulled by the splashing of the rain against the windows. It was quite dark when she awakened again. The train had stopped at a station, and Mrs. Medlock was shaking her. "You have had a sleep," she said. "It's time to open your eyes. We're at Waite Station, and we have got a long drive before us." Mary stood up and tried to keep her eyes open, while Mrs. Medlock collected her parcels. The little girl did not offer to help her, because in India, native servants always picked up or carried things, and it seemed quite proper that other people should wait on one. Yeah. She expected Mrs. Medlock to serve her as she used to with servants in India. Okay. The station was a small one, and nobody but themselves seemed to be getting out of the train. The station master spoke to Mrs. Medlock in a rough, good-natured way, pronouncing his words in a queer, broad fashion, which Mary found out afterward was Yorkshire. Oh, this is again, come on. I see thou's got back, he said, and that's Brouth, thy young, and with thee. Oh, that's very old English. Aye, that's her, answered Mrs. Medlock, speaking with a Yorkshire accent herself, and jerking her head over her shoulders toward Mary. How's thy missus? Well, the the carriage is waiting outside for thee. It's interesting. Brougham. A brougham. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Let's see how it's pronounced.
Broom.
Broom. Yeah, the G and H is silent. Broom. What is a broom? A horse-down carriage with a roof. It's a carriage run by horses. That's what is a broom. It's actually pronounced the same way as a broom, which you sweep with sweep. A broom stood on the road before the little outside platform. Mary saw that it was a smart carriage and that it was a smart footman who helped her in. His long waterproof coat and the waterproof covering of his hat were shining and dripping with rain as everything was. The purely station master included. Right. When he shut the door, mounted the box with the coachman, and they drove off, the little girl found herself seated in a comfortably cushioned corner, but she was not inclined to go to sleep again. She sat and looked out of the window, curious to see something of the road over which she was being driven, to the queer place Mrs. Medlock had spoken of. She was not at all a timid child, and she was not exactly frightened, but she felt that there was no knowing what might happen in a house with 100 rooms, nearly all shut up. A house standing on the edge of a moor. What is a moor? She said suddenly to Mrs. Medlock. Look out of the window. Look out of the window in about 10 minutes and you'll see, the woman answered. We've got to drive 5 miles across We've got to drive 5 miles across Missel Moor before we get to the manor. You won't see much because it's a dark night, but you can see something. Mary asked no more questions, but waited in the darkness of her corner, keeping her eyes on the window. The carriage lamps cast rays of light a little distance ahead of them, and she caught glimpses of the things they passed. After they had left the station, they had driven through a tiny village, and she had seen whitewashed cottages and the lights of a public house. Then they had passed a church, a church, and a vicarage. Vicarage. That's an interesting word. Let's see how it's pronounced. Vicarage. Oh, it's the house which the priest live. The priest from the church lives in a vicarage. Let's hear it.
Vicarage.
Vicarage. Yeah. This vicarage, the word vicarage means the house of the priest from the church. And a little shop window or so in a cottage with toys and sweets and odd things set out for sale. Then they were on the high road, and she saw hedges and trees. After that, there seemed nothing different for a long time, or at least it seemed a long time to her. At last, the horses began to go more slowly, as if they were climbing uphill, and presently there seemed to be no more hedges and no more trees. She could see nothing, in fact, but a dense darkness on either side. Either sides. What's these sides? All right. She leaned forward and pressed her face against the window just as the carriage gave a big jolt. "Hey, we're on the moor now, sure enough," said Mrs. Medlock. The carriage lamps shed a yellow light on a rough-looking road, which seemed to be cut through bushes and low-growing things, which ended in a great expanse of dark apparently spread out before and around them. A wind was rising and making a singular, wild, low-rushing sound. It's not the sea, is it?" said Mary, looking round at her companion. "No, not it," answered Mrs. Medlock. "Nor it isn't fields nor mountains. It's just miles and miles and miles of wild land that nothing grows on but heather and gorse, and broom, and nothing lives on but wild ponies and sheep." Wild ponies. Yeah, pony is a horse, very small horse. But wild ponies and sheep. I feel as if it might be the sea if there were water on it, said Mary. It sounds like the sea just now. That's the wind blowing through the bushes, Mrs. Medlock said. It's a wild, dreary enough place to my mind, though there is plenty that likes it, particularly when the heather's in bloom. On and on they drove through the darkness, and though the rain stopped, the wind rushed by and whistled and made strange sounds. The road went up and down, and several times the carriage passed over a little bridge beneath which water rushed very fast with a great deal of noise. Mary felt as if the drive would never come to an end, and that the wide, bleak moor was a wide expanse of a black ocean through. which she was passing on a strip of dry land. "I don't like it," she said to herself. "I don't like it." And she pinched her thin lips more tightly together. The horses were climbing up a hilly piece of road when she first caught sight of a light. Mrs. Medlock saw it as soon as she did and drew a long sigh of relief. "Eh, I am glad to see that bit of light twinkling," she exclaimed. "It's the light in the lodge window. We shall get a good cup of tea after a bit, at all events." It was after a bit, as she said, for when the carriage passed through the park gates, there was still 2 miles of avenue to drive through. 2 miles of avenue to drive through, and the trees, which nearly met overhead, made it seem as if they were driving through a long, dark vault. They drove out of the vault into a clear space and stopped before an immensely long but low-built house which seemed to ramble around a stone court. Here, stopped before means stopped in front of. Okay, so let's say it again. They drove out of the vault into a clear space and stopped before an immensely long but low-built house which seemed to ramble round a stone court. At first, Mary thought that there were no lights at all in the windows, but as she got out of the carriage, she saw that one room in a corner upstairs showed a dull glow. The entrance door was a huge one made of massive, curiously shaped panels of oak studded with big iron nails and bound with great iron bars. It opened into an enormous hall which was so dimly lighted that the faces in the portraits on the walls and the figures in the suits of armor made Mary feel that she did not want to look at them. As she stood on the stone floor, she looked a very small, odd little black figure, and she felt as small and lost and odd as she looked. A neat, thin old man stood near the manservant, who opened the door for them. "You are to take her to her room," he said, in a husky voice. "He doesn't want to see her. He's going to London in the morning." "Very well, Mr. Pitcher," Mrs. Medlock answered. "So long as I know what's expected of me, I can manage." "What's expected of you, Mrs. Medlock?" Mr. Pitcher said. "Is that you make sure that he's not disturbed and that he doesn't see what he doesn't want to see." Let's say it again. "What's expected of you, Mrs. Medlock," Mr. Pitcher said, "is that you make sure that he's not disturbed and that he doesn't see what he doesn't want to see." And then Mary Lennox was led up a broad staircase and down a long corridor and up a short flight of steps and through another corridor and another, until a door opened in a wall, and she found herself in a room with a fire in it and a supper on a table. Supper is another word for dinner. Food. Supper is the dinner. Food for dinner. Mrs. Medlock said unceremoniously. All right? Listen to the pronunciation of this word. Seems interesting. Unceremoniously. Unceremoniously. All right. Mrs. Medlock said unceremoniously, "Well, here you are. This room and the next are where you'll live, and you must keep them. And you must keep to them. Don't you forget that." It was in this way Mistress Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, and she had perhaps never felt quite so contrary in all her life. It was in this way Mistress Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, Misselthwaite Manor, and she had perhaps never felt quite so contrary in all her life. Chapter 4. Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug racking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all she had never seen a room at all like it, and thought it curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry, with a forest scene embroidered on it. A tapestry is a cloth. It's a painting made of a cloth. And this word, I need to hear its pronunciation just to be sure. Embroidered. All right. What embroidered mean? It means stitched. The forest scene is stitched on the tapestry. It's like drawing but with threads. Okay, let's read it again. The walls were covered with tapestry, with forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of the deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land, which seemed to have no trees on it, and to look rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out of the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there?" she said. "Yes." "That's the moor," with a good-natured grin. That they like it?" I think she means does you. That's how they say it. Whatever. No, answered Mary. I hate it. That's because thou'rt not used to it, Martha said, going back to her hearth. Thou thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it. Do you? Do you? Inquired Mary. Aye, that I do, answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with It's covered with growing things as smell sweet. It's fair, lovely in spring and summer when they grow, when the gorse are broom and heather in the flower. It smells of honey, and there is such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and skylarks make such a nice noise, humming and singing. I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything. Mary listened. Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants had been used to India. The native servants she has been used to in India were not in the least like this. They were obsequious. Let's see. It's an interesting word. Obsequious. Oh, it means obedient. Obsequious means obedient and excessive of several degree. Yeah, it means obedient, excessively obedient.
Obsequious.
They were obsequious and servile and did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were their equals. They made salams, that's Arabic. They made salams and called them protector of the poor, and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. Commanded. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry. She wondered a little what this girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap back, if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. You are a strange servant, she said from her pillows, rather haughtily. Okay, that's an interesting word. Let's see. Come on. Haughtily. All right. Haughtily mean in a way that is very, very rude. In an unfriendly way and seeming consider yourself better than other people. Haughtily. All right. She said from her pillows rather haughtily. Martha sat up on her heels with her blacking brush in her hand and laughed without seeming the least out of temper. I know that. she said. If there was a grand miss, the, if there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have been even one of the under housemaids. I might have been let to be scullery maid, but I'd never have been let upstairs. I'm too common, and I talk too much Yorkshire. But this is a funny house for all it's so grand. Seems like there is neither master nor mistress except Mr. Pitcher and Mrs. Medlock. Mr. Craven, he won't be troubled about anything when he's here. And he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she could never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses. Are you going to be my servant? Mary asked, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub her grate again. I am Mrs. Medlock's servant, she said stoutly, and she's Mr. Craven's. But I am to do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit. But you won't need much waiting on. Who is going to dress me? Demanded Mary. Martha sat up on her heels again and stared. She spoke in broad Yorkshire in her amazement. Can you dress yourself? It's supposed to be can you dress yourself, but in the Yorkshire accent. Why they write in accent, I have no idea. This is very stupid and very annoying. Can you they dress thy thing? She said. What do you mean? I don't understand your language. Well and all. Alright, I'm guessing, just guessing, alright? She means, can't you dress yourself? She said. But she said it, Canna tha dress thy sin. What do you mean? I don't understand your language, said Mary. I don't understand it either. I forgot, Martha said. Mrs. Medlock told me I'd have to be careful or you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes? No, answered Mary, quite indignantly. I never did in my life. My ayah dressed me, of course. Well, said Martha, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent. It's time thee should learn. Thee cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on theeson a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools. What with the nurses and being washed and dressed and took out to walk as if they were puppies. It is different in India, said Mistress Mary, disdainfully, in a way that is very, very angry and disgusted.
Disdainfully.
It's two D and D. Disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not at all crushed. I can see it's different, she answered almost sympathetically. I dare say it's because there is such a lot of blacks Oh, I dare say it's because there is such a lot of blacks there instead of respectable white people. When I heard you was coming from India, I thought you was a black too. Yeah, that's racist. That's when at the time when racism wasn't the thing, actually, they didn't have much respect for anyone. All right. Mary sat up in bed furious. What? She said. What? You thought I was a native? You daughter of a pig? Martha stared and looked hot. Hot mean angry here. Who are you calling names? She said. You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. I have nothing against the blacks. I have nothing against the blacks. When you read about them in tracts, they are always very religious. You always read as a blacks, a man and a brother. I've never seen a black, and I was fair pleased to think I was going to see one close. When I come into light your fire this morning, when I come into light, come in. Already they write exactly as they say it, even if it's wrong. When I come in to light your fire this morning, I crept up to your bed and pulled the cover back careful to look at you. And there you was. Yeah, this is supposed to be there you were. There's a lot of errors here. That they just write it as they say it. And there you was, disappointedly, no more black than me, for all you are so yeller. Yeller, I guess it's yellow? Yeah. Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. You thought I was a native? You dared. You don't know anything about natives. They are not people. They are servants who must salam to you. Salam. Yeah. They must salam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything. She was in such a rage and felt so hopeless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face downward on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. "Hey, you mustn't cry like that there," she begged. "You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything. Just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying." Yeah, that's an accent. They are writing accent. It's very annoying. Yeah, it's very annoying. There was something comforting. What? Lose the accent. There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way which had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. "It's time for thee to get up now," she said. "Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and tea, the breakfast and tea and dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on the with thee closes, with thee closes. If that all, if that all, get out your bed. If that buttons are at the back, then cannot button them up the self. Oh my God. Themselves. All right. All right. When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Mrs. Medlock. Those are not mine, she said. Mine are black. She looked the thick white wool coat and dress over and added with cool approval, those are nicer than mine. Oh my God. These are the ones they must put on, Martha answered. Mr. Craven ordered Mrs. Medlock to get 'em in London. He said, I won't have a child dressed in black wandering about like a lost soul, he said. It would make the place sadder than it is. Put color on her. Mother, she said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold with black black Hersel. I hate black things, said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. Why doesn't they put on their own shoes, she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. My ayah did it, answered Mary, staring. It was the custom. She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, It's not the custom, and one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots, and pick things up and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things. All right. Here, the word waiting means serving. Being a servant doesn't actually mean waiting. It means being a servant. All right. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk. But Mary only listened. But Mary only listened to her coldly and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first, she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all," she said. "There is 12 of us, and my father only gets 16 shilling a week. I can tell you my mother's put to it to get porridge for 'em all. To get porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on the moor and play there all day, and mother says the air of the moor fattens them. She says she believes they eat the grass, same as the wild ponies do. Our Deacon, he's 12 years old. Our Deacon means our son Deacon. He's 12 years old, and he's got a young pony he calls his own." "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. "He found it on the moor with its mother when it was a little one, and he began to make friends with it. And give it bits of bread and pluck young grass of it for it. And it got to like him, so it follows him about, and it lets him get on its back. Dickens a kind lad, and animals likes him." Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own, and had always thought she should like one. So she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, and as she had never before been interested in anyone but herself, it was the downing of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into a nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy old pictures on the walls and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the center was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it," she said. "They doesn't want the porridge," Martha exclaimed incredulously. I think this means impolitely. I'm just gonna make sure. Let's make sure.
Incredulously.
Incredulously, it means in a manner indicating disbelief. Yeah, incredulously. She didn't believe that she doesn't want the porridge. It's like a soup, a stew. Incredulously. Martha exclaimed incredulously. "No, they doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it, or a bit of sugar. Treacle is a spice, like salt." "I don't want it," repeated Mary. Said Martha. "I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes." See what victuals means. Jordanians.
Vittel.
Vittel. Are you
Vittel.
sure that's how pronounced? Vittel.
Vittel.
Oh, it's not Vic. It's Vit. The C is silent. Victuals. What is victuals? It's food or provisions. It means food. I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes. Why? Said Mary coldly. Why? Echoed Martha. Because they scarce ever had their stomachs full in their lives. They are as hungry as young hawks and foxes. I don't know what it is to be hungry, said Mary, with indifference of ignorance. Martha looked indignant. Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough, she said outspokenly. I've no patience with folks as sits and just stares at good bread and meat. My word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what here under their pine forests? Okay, let's see how this is pronounced. Pinafores. Oh, it's a piece of clothing. Pinafores. Okay, I want it pronounced, please.
Pinafores.
Pinafores. Are you sure? Sure. Yeah.
Pinafores.
Pinafores. It's a piece of clothing for children. Yeah. The one that's supposed to like collect all the food that can fall from their mouths. Yeah. I don't know how to describe it. Whatever. Why don't you take it to them? Suggested Mary. It's not mine, answered Martha stoutly. And this isn't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for mother, and give her a day's rest. Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. You wrap up warm and run out and play. You wrap up warm and run out and play, you, said Martha. I'll do you good. It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat. Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? Well, if they doesn't go out, they'll have to stay in, and what has that got to do? I don't know. Mary glanced about her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? She inquired. Martha stared. You'll go by yourself, she answered. You'll have to learn to play like other children does when they haven't got sisters and brothers. Our Dickon goes off and the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's got sheep and the moor. He's got sheep on the moor that knows him, and birds as comes and eats out of his hands. However little there is to eat, he always saves a bit of his bread to coax his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. There would be birds outside, though there would not be ponies or sheep. They would be different from the birds in India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her and pair of stout little boots, and she showed her way downstairs. If they goes around that you'll come to the gardens, she said, pointing to a gate in a wall of shrubbery. Shrubbery? Is that shrubbery? Shrubbery. I hope it's not. I hope it's strawberry. Shrubbery. What shrubbery mean? I'm guessing it's the tree.
Shrubbery.
Shrubbery. Shrubbery is an area in a garden planted with shrubs. Yeah, shrubbery. What is a shrub? It's a small tree. Bushy tree. All right. There is lots of flowers in summertime, but there is nothing blooming now. She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, One of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary in spite of herself. Why? Why? Asked Mary in spite of herself. Here was another locked door added to the 100 in the strange house. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There is Mrs. Medlock bell ringing. I must run. After she was gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door in the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the garden, which no one had been into for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like and whether there were any flowers still alive in it. When she had passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in great gardens, with wide lawns and winding walks, with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds, and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old grey fountain in its midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk into a garden. She was just thinking this when she saw that at the end of the path she was following, there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. She was not familiar enough with England to know that she was coming upon the kitchen gardens, where the vegetables and fruit were growing. She went toward the wall and found that there was a green door in the ivy, and that it stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found that it was a garden with walls all around it, and that it was only one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into one another. She saw another open green door, revealing bushes and pathways between beds containing winter vegetables. Fruit trees were trained flat against the wall. and over some of the beds there were glass frames. The place was bare and ugly enough, Mary thought, as she stood and stared about her. It might be nicer in summer, when things were green, but there was nothing pretty about it now. Presently, an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door leading from the second garden. He looked startled when he saw Mary, and then touched his cap. He had a surely old face, and did not seem at all pleased to see her. But then she was displeased with his garden, and wore her quite contrary expression, and certainly did not seem at all pleased to see him. "What is this place?" she asked. "One of the kitchen gardens," he answered. "What is that?" said Mary, pointing through the other green door. "Another of 'em, shortly. There is another one of them inside. There is one on the other side. There is another one on the other side of the wall, and there is the orchard on the other side of that." "Can I go in them?" asked Mary. If they likes, but there is now to see. There is nothing, all right? If they likes, but there is nothing to see. Mary made no response. She went down the path and through the second green door. There she found more walls and winter vegetables and glass frames, but in the second wall there was another green door, and it was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden, which no one had seen for 10 years, as she was not at all a timid child and always did what she wanted to do. Mary went to the green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open because she wanted to be sure she had found the mysterious garden. But it did open quite easily, and she walked through it and found herself in an orchard. There were walls all around it, also, and trees trained against them, and there were bare fruit trees growing in the winter brown grass. But there was no green door to be seen anywhere. Mary looked for it, and yet when she had entered the upper end of the garden, she had noticed that the wall did not seem to end with the orchard, but to extend beyond it, as if it enclosed a place at the other side. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them. And suddenly he burst into his winter song. Almost as if he had caught sight of her and was calling to her. She stopped and listened to him, and somehow his cheerful, friendly little whistle gave her a pleased feeling. Even a disagreeable little girl may be lonely, and the big closed house and big bare moor and big bare gardens had made this one feel as if there was no one left in the world but herself. If she had been an affectionate child who had been used to being loved, she would have broken her heart. But even though she was mistress Mary quite contrary. She was desolate, and the bright-breasted little bird brought a look into her sour little face, which was almost a smile. She listened to him until he flew away. He was not like an Indian bird, and she liked him and wondered if she should ever see him again. Perhaps he lived in the mysterious garden and knew all about it. Perhaps it was because she had nothing whatever to do that she thought so much of the deserted garden. She was curious about it and wanted to see what it was like. Why had Mr. Archibald Craven buried the key? If he had liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? She wondered if she should ever see him, but she knew that if she did, she should not like him, and he would not like her. And that she should only stand and stare at him and say nothing, though she should be wanting dreadfully to ask him why he had done such a queer thing. People never like me, and I never like people, she thought. And I never can talk as the children could. And I never can talk as the Crawford children could. They were always talking and laughing and making noises. She thought of the robin and of the way he seemed to She thought of the robin and of the way he seemed to sing his song at her. And as she remembered the treetop he perched on, she stopped rather suddenly on the pass. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. I feel sure it was, she said. There was a wall round the place, and there was no door. She walked back into the first kitchen garden she had entered and found the old man digging there. She went and stood beside him and watched him a few moments in her cold little way. He took no notice of her, and so at last she spoke to him. I have been into the other gardens, she said. There was nothing to prevent thee. There was nothing to prevent thee, he answered crustily. I went into the orchard. There was no dog at the door to bite thee, he answered. There was no door there into the other garden, said Mary. What garden? He said in a rough voice, stopping his digging for a moment. The one on the other side of the wall, answered Mistress Mary. There are trees there. I saw the tops of them. A bird with a red breast was sitting on one of them, and he sang. To her surprise, the surely old weather-beaten face actually changed its expression. A slow smile spread over it, and the gardener looked quite different. It made her think that it was curious how much nicer a person looked when he smiled. She had not thought of it before. He turned about to the orchard side of his garden, and began to whistle, a low, soft whistle. She could not understand how such a surly man make such a coaxing sound. Almost the next moment, a wonderful thing happened. she heard a soft little rushing flight through the air, and it was the bird with the red breast flying to them. And he actually alighted on the big clod of earth quite near to the gardener's foot. Here he is, chuckled the old man, and then he spoke to the bird as if he were speaking to a child. Where have they been, they, cheeky little beggar? He said. I've not seen thee before today. Has they begun the courting this early in the season? Thou'rt too forward. The bird put his tiny head on one side and looked up at him with his soft bright eye, which was like a black dewdrop. He seemed quite familiar and not the least afraid. He hopped about and picked the earth briskly, looking for seeds and insects. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart, because he was so pretty and cheerful, and seemed so like a person. He had a tiny plump body and a delicate beak, and slender delicate legs. Will he always come when you call him? She asked, almost in a whisper. Aye, that he will. I've known him ever since he was a fledgling. He came out of the nest in the other garden, and when first he flew out over the wall, he was too weak to fly back for a few days, and we got friendly. When he went over the wall again, the rest of the brood was gone, and he was lonely, and he came back to me. What kind of bird is he? Mary asked. Doesn't they know? No. He's a robin redbreast, and they are the friendliest, curious birds alive. They are almost as friendly as dogs. If you know how to get on with them, watch him picking about there and looking around at us now and again. He knows we're talking about him. It was the queerest thing in the world to see the old fellow. He looked at the plump little scarlet waistcoated bird as if he were both proud and fond of him. He's a consistent one, he chuckled. He likes to hear folk talk about him, and curious, bless me, there never was his like for curiosity and meddling. He's always coming to see what I'm planting. He knows all the things Mr. Craven never troubles hissel to find out. He's the head gardener, he is. The robin hopped about busily, picking the soil, and now and then stopped and looked at them a little. Mary thought his black dewdrop eyes gazed at her with great curiosity. It really seemed as if he were finding out all about her. The queer feeling in her heart increased. All right, that will be it for today. And we will continue the rest tomorrow. Have a great night.